Hi, everyone. It's Eric Murray from the SugarHuddle.com. Today, I want to preview the AFC East. I wrote about all the teams in the AFC East earlier in the week. And remember to go to SugarHuddle.com and read those articles. All the other articles I have on the Sugar Huddle, a lot of good content. I remember there's a YouTube link to this YouTube channel on there as well. But anyways, I want to recap the AFC East. A big question with the East is, it's obviously been a division that hasn't been particularly good for a lot of years. The Patriots have dominated. And a big question is, can anybody catch the Patriots this year? Obviously, when you look down the road, the future, 2019, 2020, beyond, especially once Brady and or Belichick retires, then yeah, it'll be a different landscape. But I think as far as 2018, it's still a Patriots division to lose. As far as the Patriots, I think they're going to take a very slight step back. They have a streak going on. I think it's like up to maybe 8 years in a row now that they've won 12 or more games every single year. They've been obviously unbelievable. I actually have them going 11-5 and winning this division. For me, I just think it's been a weird offseason. Dating back to last season. There were all those reports, all those stories that came out that Belichick and Robert Kraft weren't seeing that eye to eye, and Belichick and Brady weren't seeing eye to eye, and there's the whole thing about the circumstances around the Jimmy Garoppolo trade. There was Tom Brady's personal trainer, Alex Guerrero, and how he had eventually kind of gotten essentially banned from the Patriots training room. And then it's just been kind of a weird thing because, Tom Brady had kept talking about how he wanted to play until he was 45, and he still hints at that sometimes, but then there's been other times, like that documentary he made, Tom versus Time, where he's basically saying that 2018 might be his last year, and he just turned 41 the other day. And then the other thing, too, is not only has his relationship kind of soured to Belichick, but just kind of the team in general, because remember, Belichick, for reasons that are still unknown, benched cornerback Malcolm Butler right before the Super Bowl was about to start, even though he had played more defensive snaps than any Patriot all year. And, the entire team, especially the defensive guys, didn't understand, why are you doing that? And again, he still hasn't given a legitimate reason. He's given a bunch of bogus reasons. So what happened? Well, of course, the Patriots defense got gashed the entire game against the Eagles. Ultimately, the Patriots scored a lot of points too, but they lost 41-33, and Malcolm Butler could have made a big difference in that game. And so there's been a lot of distrust kind of building in that locker room. And remember, Belichick's a defensive-minded guy, so the fact that, he has kind of that close relationship with the defensive guys, and the fact that a lot of them are not trusting him now, that's very un-Patriot-like. It's just been a very un-Patriot-like last several months, and that's a thing that's kind of concerning that, I said in the article, cracks in the foundation. Patriots are still going to be in Super Bowl contention this year, but you can just tell that this thing is getting ready to end here soon, and everybody's about to move on because besides Brady's age and Belichick thinking about retiring, it's just the relationship's just souring there. Another thing that's kind of un-Patriot-like, speaking of Brady, is him and Rob Gronkowski. They both initially skipped out on the voluntary OTAs, the organized team activities, a couple months back. And again, they're voluntary, but in a lot of ways they're mandatory. When you see guys skip out on those things with other teams, it's usually not the biggest deal in the world, even though it is a little bit unusual with quarterbacks. But when it's the Patriots, you just don't see that. And then, one of their star players, wide receiver Julian Edelman, he gets suspended for performance-enhancing drugs. He's going to be suspended the first 4 games. And you just don't see Patriots players get in trouble for anything. So there's just a lot of weird things going on with New England this offseason. Defensively, they've been bend don't break. They were a top 5 scoring defense, but they were towards the bottom of the league in a number of categories with yards and things like that. One of the things I thought was a little ironic is people talked about how bad their pass rush is, and they actually had, I think it was like something like 42 sacks. So they actually had a good deal of sacks, but they didn't have that one key guy. They traded away Chandler Jones a couple years ago. Trey Flowers led the team. I think he had like 6.5 sacks last year. And then Derek Rivers, who was a third-round rookie from my alma mater, Youngstown State, he he tore his ACL in preseason, never got to play a game last year. So with him back, maybe he turns out to be a breakout player and helps them. But for the time being, they don't have that kind of go-to pass rusher. It's kind of a by committee. And when you're kind of ranking low in a lot of categories, and then the other thing is the Patriots decided they're not going to have a defensive coordinator this year. Matt Patricia left, of course, and became the Lions head coach. But basically, their linebackers coach is going to kind of get elevated where he's got more responsibility, and it sounds like Belichick, who has his hand in everything, is going to be pretty involved. And that's another thing that's kind of a scary thing is when you have like what's essentially co-coordinators, whether it's offensive or defensive, a lot of times that doesn't really always bode well because you have these multiple voices telling you multiple things and then kind of getting in guys' heads. And if some of these defensive guys don't trust Belichick as is and are starting to lose a little respect for him, that's tough. Now, they did trade for Jason McCourty, Devin's brother, so the Twins will be reunited in that Patriots secondary. So he's still got a pretty good secondary, but Malcolm Butler, I think, at least in the short term for this next year, I think will be a tough loss. And I think Malcolm Butler, and I'll talk about this more when I preview the AFC South down the road, but I think Malcolm Butler is going to be one of the most motivated players in the NFL this year, and I think he really wants to light it up. So we'll see how that affects the Patriots. We've seen the Patriots lose a lot of guys, and they've been able to bounce back from it. They did bolster their running game. They actually used a first-round pick, which is very, very unusual for them on a running back, and Sony Michel out of Georgia. He actually just got injured the other day. It sounds like he should be back for week 1 or maybe miss week 1 at the most. So a little bit of a tough start, but again, he's a running back. He can come right in. He should be fine. So that should help them offensively. They lose both Danny Amendola and obviously Amendola went to Miami, but with Edelman, you lose him for the first 4 games, which you can deal with that, but they've got a few challenging games to start the year, and that could be a little bit tough. You did draft a guy out of Miami who's kind of fits that mold of Patriots receiver, in Braxton Berrios. Could be a return man too, so he could be an interesting guy to watch. Could be a breakout player, but you traded Brandon Cooks, so they've got some issues there with their receiving core, and obviously we'll see if Sony Michel can come back from this injury to start the season, and if he can hold up throughout the season, because their running back depth chart's nothing really special as is. So he's a big upgrade for him. And then obviously with Gronkowski, you never know, is he going to play 14, 15, 16 games, or is he only going to play 8 or 10? So that's a big thing. He's getting a little bit older too. And, he makes a big impact. They can win without him, but they're more dominant with him. And so that'll be interesting. But overall, I think there's some cracks in the foundation there with the Patriots. They could still easily get those 12 wins. I have them at 11. Some people have them as low as 10. I still think they're going to run away with the division, like I said. But, the last all 4 times the Patriots have lost the Super Bowl in their franchise history, and especially these 2 with Brady and Belichick, 2007 and 2011 when they lost to the Giants both times, they didn't get back to the Super Bowl the next year. They've won Super Bowls and repeated or gotten back to the Super Bowl the next year after winning a Super Bowl, but they've never lost a Super Bowl and then got back the next year. It happened in the past with the 85 and 96 Patriots, but as far as the 07 and 11 team, 07, the next year, Brady tore his ACL week 1, done for the year. Patriots still won 11 games without him, but they didn't get back to the Super Bowl again until 2011, and then they lose in 2011. They didn't get back to the Super Bowl until 2014, and now with Brady at 41, some of these kind of locker room issues, and that's one last thing I want to say about the Patriots before I move on is, in the past when they've had adversity, it's usually been the media or non-Patriots fans against them, and they use that as motivation. Like when they got in trouble for the whole Spygate thing, and especially the Deflategate situation and Brady getting suspended, they use that as kind of that us against the world mentality. Well, with all the stuff that's going on these last several months with the Patriots, it's internal, so it's like us against us. So I think that's another thing you have to pay attention to. So I think the Patriots, will have a hard time maybe even getting back to the AFC title game, let alone trying to get to another Super Bowl. So it'll be interesting, but there are cracks in the foundations there, and I'd definitely be concerned if I'm a Patriots fan. We'll see. I have the Jets finishing second in the East, and the thing is, it's kind of a crapshoot who could finish second. I got him actually going 8-8. I'm very high on Sam Darnold. I think this guy is going to be a superstar. I said it in one of my previous posts on my website when I was talking about the rookie quarterbacks, I think a month or so ago. I actually think he's going to be the third quarterback ever to finish his career 4-0 in the Super Bowl. Obviously, Terry Bradshaw and Joe Montana are the other two. Some still say Montana's greatest ever. But he has those Joe Cool elements to him, but he's even bigger and he has better arm than Montana. He can do a lot of kind of Aaron Rodgers type things as far as the scrambling goes, as far as some of the throws he makes, kind of mixed in with some of the creativity of Ben Roethlisberger and Andrew Luck and some of these guys. Turnovers are a major issue. There's no doubt about it. And I think he will have some turnover issues his first year or two in the league. But the thing is, if you have the touchdowns and yards and you're making the plays, especially in the fourth quarter, especially in a league where, every game is basically decided by 7 points or less, that's huge. And I think the big thing with Darnold is, he had the adversity in college. Some of these quarterbacks didn't have as much adversity that are coming out this year, and others did have a lot. A guy like Baker Mayfield didn't really have a whole lot of adversity at Oklahoma as far as on the field. There's obviously some of the off the field stuff, but as far as on the field, he had a pretty loaded team and he didn't have to deal with a ton of adversity. But you look at Darnold, despite USC being a historically great program, they've had their ups and downs in recent years. They're not consistently winning double-digit games and competing for national titles like they used to. And he came into a situation where redshirt freshmen, they're 1-2. He played really well that first start against a tough Utah team. The defense gave up a touchdown late in that game. That was back in 2016. And then they didn't lose the rest of the year. He had that unbelievable Rose Bowl comeback against Penn State where he, in a lot of ways, kind of single-handedly carried the team. 10 for 10, 135 yards and a touchdown in the fourth quarter. They were down 49-35 to start the fourth, ended up winning 52-49. And he's had a lot of comeback wins last year as well in 2017. Part of the reason why he had all the interceptions he had was a lot of them were the first half of the year when USC was trying to figure out its receivers, and a lot of guys were dropping passes and running wrong routes. So his main thing is the fumbles. He fumbles way too much, and it's not a hand issue thing, and it's not an anticipating the rush thing. For him, it's just the fact that if it's on, like a blitz or something, he'll see the guys coming, but when he's basically wrapped up and about to go down, he's still trying to get rid of the ball, and it gets basically, swatted out of his hand. Kind of like, you see like Ben Roethlisberger, even to this day, he still tries to make things happen, even when he's kind of in the process of getting sacked, or same with Andrew Luck. And sometimes that still leads to turnovers for those guys. So that's a big thing with Darnold. And then when he does scramble, he carries the ball like a loaf of bread, and sometimes defenders that are kind of chasing him are able to rip it out. So really, those are kind of correctable things. He's a very accurate quarterback, a lot of timing, a big-time playmaker. But, at USC, he had a lot of offensive line issues, the receiver issues off and on. And even though they had talented running backs, the running game was affected by some of those other issues. So the fact that he dealt with that adversity and he still found ways to help them win games and have, comeback victories and things like that, that's huge in the NFL, because the best NFL quarterbacks are very, very clutch. You think about Brady, you think about Ben, you think about Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, these guys are all extremely clutch. They make all the big plays at the end of games. You want the ball in their hands with 2 minutes or less, or an overtime or whatever it is. So that's what Darnold can do, and that's going to be a big attribute going forward, even with the turnover issues. But I think the biggest thing is with the Jets. A lot of people thought they were only going to win 1 or 2 games last year and be the worst team in football. They actually started 3-2, and then they ended up 5-11. And the big thing was Josh McCown got banged up like he usually does, but he played well. But they had some issues with a lot of injuries. Their personnel wasn't great, and they lost a lot of tight games. They had a whole bunch of games where they lost by 7 points or less, which I know happens with a lot of teams, but it seemed like they lost a lot of games. I remember looking it up, and I put it in the article. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but they had like 5, 6, 7 games there almost in a row where they lost them all by 7 points or less. So all of a sudden you convert some of those to wins. 8-8's not so impossible. Robbie Anderson is a really talented receiver. For as much as people criticize the supporting cast, which is why I get back to Darnold, because he's used to having the personnel issues. There's a lot of roster issues with the Jets still. They traded up to get Darnold, so that really killed them as far as the draft and draft picks and stuff like that. But Robbie Anderson's a heck of a receiver. He had the off the field stuff in the offseason, but if he stays out of trouble, he could be one of the next star receivers in this league. Remember, Quincy Enunwa is a pretty decent receiver, and he actually missed all of last season. He did get banged up in training camp the other day, but if he's able to play this year, he'll be another guy that contributes. Remember, they signed Terrell Pryor. Terrell Pryor had over 1,000 yards in Cleveland a couple years ago. Had that really down year, only caught like 20 passes with the Redskins last year, but maybe he builds a great relationship with Darnold. He's an ex-quarterback, so maybe he can help out Darnold in that way. So he could have a pretty good year. Tight end is still an issue. They drafted Chris Herndon in the later rounds out of Miami. He's going to compete with Jordan Leggett, tight end out of Clemson, who missed all of last year with that neck injury. And if he's able to play the whole year, maybe they'll have a breakout guy at tight end, but still some issues there. They overhauled their offensive line. They brought in 3 new guys. They had James Carpenter, Spencer Long at center, and somebody else, I can't remember off the top of my head. But their offensive line should be better. They did give up a lot of sacks, and they did have issues last year. But, and then they brought in Isaiah Crowell, who's kind of a middle-of-the-road, mediocre running back, and Bilal Powell, who's coming back, is 30. But, those guys could form a decent tandem. If those receivers stay healthy and stay out of trouble, those guys could be pretty good. So all of a sudden the offense has a chance to make a big jump. And then, defensively, obviously, head coach Todd Bowles, he was a defensive coach. That's his specialty. And there, again, a lot of it is personnel issues. But remember, like Darnold, who, was a gift falling to them at 3rd overall, you had Jamal Adams in last year's draft falling to the Jets at 6th overall when he was supposed to go a lot higher. And the same with Leonard Williams a couple years before that. And Leonard Williams, Pro Bowler a couple years ago, still a great player. Jamal Adams, really nice rookie year, tremendous leader. So those are some franchise cornerstone players. And so they got some stuff to build around. Remember, they signed Trumaine Johnson, who I really liked from the Rams, to that big contract this offseason. I think it was like 5 years, $72 million, pretty big deal. And, the Jets, they were like somewhere in that 20th to 25th range in takeaways. I think it was like 20th. So having Trumaine Johnson, who can be a real playmaker, that's big. He's had a good amount of interceptions in his young career already, and he's a big-time player. So he's a guy who's probably worth every penny. Buster Screen, who's their nickel corner, comes back, and he's still a pretty decent player. Morris Claiborne's going to be their other starting corner. He was there with the Jets last year. He was a disappointment in Dallas, and he was just okay with the Jets last year. So obviously there's a lot of talent there. He was a former 6th overall pick, but he's still got to live up to it. Linebacking core, an issue there is you've got 2 young pass rushers in your 3-4, 2 young rush linebackers that, again, have talent, but they just haven't lived up to it yet. Lorenzo Malton, he missed all of last year with injury. In his first 2 years in the league, he only had 6.5 sacks combined. And then the other guy is Jordan Jenkins, who played all of last year, and he only had 3 sacks. So your pass rush is not very good, and that's a big thing. If you don't have the pass rush, that's going to really hurt your secondary. So across the board, their defensive rankings weren't great. Their run defense, I believe, was middle of the road, but their pass defense was kind of in the bottom 3rd. And, again, Trumaine Johnson can definitely help, and a better pass rusher would help. But they still have a lot of personnel issues. But I think with Darnold, if he plays all year, if he's the guy and looks pretty good right out of the gate, I think they can steal some games. And so I think 8-8 is definitely not unrealistic at all. So that's why I got them 2nd in the East. And speaking of a team that also has a lot of talent and upside, but again has personnel issues and still trying to upgrade in some areas, Miami Dolphins. Last year they went 6-10. Remember, Ryan Tannehill went down, went down before the season, and so you signed Jay Cutler, who was retired at the time, who had worked with head coach Adam Gase before, and of course that didn't work out well. Outside of the New England game, Cutler wasn't very good last year. You still had Matt Moore, and now this year Tannehill's back, and you've got Brock Osweiler as a backup. We'll see how that works out. Good luck there. But I do like Gase as a coach, and I think he took him to the playoffs 2 years ago, and I thought he did a nice job, and he did what he could with what he had last year. But they have issues. They've been a dysfunctional franchise for a number of years. I said in the article when I did the preview on them earlier in the week on the sugarhuddle.com that they're a team that's chasing ghosts. They've been trying to find that franchise quarterback since Dan Marino, and they were such a good franchise and so many playoff appearances and everything for years and years and years, for about a 25 to 30-year stretch, and then all of a sudden, Marino retires after 17 years in the league, and then all of a sudden it was just kind of like, they can't get a quarterback. They've only made a few playoff appearances since then. So they've been struggling. There's been questions about Stephen Ross, the owner, just questions about the franchise in general. I believe they had some salary cap issues this offseason. They made some changes there. They did a good job. They converted Rashad Jones and Ryan Tannehill's the majority of their salaries to a signing bonus because they were both making big money, so that helped cap-wise. But, again, a lot of dysfunction there. Still trying to figure out if they have their franchise quarterback. Tannehill, he hasn't been bad in his career, but, he's been in the league last year was going to be his 6th year, but he didn't play, so technically this will be his 6th year. But he hasn't been bad. He's just, he'll put up decent numbers, but a lot of times will just kind of look average. He's an athletic quarterback, but sometimes his decision-making, is kind of questionable, and he's okay, but he's nothing special, and he just doesn't feel like he's a quarterback of the future there. He's just a middle-of-the-road quarterback. They definitely need an upgrade. His contract's going to be expiring soon. I think this is his last year, or last year before they can cut him, but I'm pretty sure it's his last year. But, so Tannehill staying healthy will be big, but remember, he had arguably the best year of his career 2 years ago when he was playing with Gase, when Gase first got there. So Tannehill's finally healthy. Maybe they could make a playoff run. Like I said, 9-7 is probably going to get you into the playoffs in the AFC this year. But, it's still one of those things that you wonder there. Offensive line-wise, they got guys who have the talent, but again, fully living up to it. When you think about Laramie Tunsil, Juwan James, brought in a couple of guys in the offseason. I think Josh Sitton and somebody else. I thought I had it written down here. But anyways, so, decent offensive line, really talented running backs. They trade away Jay Ajayi mid-season last year, but they had Kenyon Drake, who really started breaking out toward the second half of the year. And then they drafted an interesting player out of Arizona State, Kalen Ballage, who is really a freak athlete. He's not an every-down back because that's not what he did at Arizona State, but a combination of him and Drake could be a pretty scary tandem down the road, especially if they figure out the quarterback situation. But, it was surprising because they had an opportunity to possibly trade up a couple spots in the draft and take one of those 4 quarterbacks at the top of the draft. They didn't do it. The Cardinals traded ahead of them. Bills traded ahead of them, and so they stuck with Tannehill. So it'll be interesting to see, how much that decision impacts them. We've talked about other teams at the top of this year's draft who, passed up on quarterbacks, and we'll see if that was a mistake or not. We'll see. We'll see how that all turns out. But receiver-wise, they traded away Jarvis Landry. But, they still got Kenny Stills, pretty decent. Devontae Parker's been a disappointment, but he's shown some flashes. He's having a bad camp so far from what I've heard. So we'll see what he does. They got Danny Amendola. Speaking of Danny Amendola, coming over from the Patriots. So they have a decent receiving core. Mike Gesicki, the rookie tight end from Penn State, who was my favorite tight end in this year's draft, I think could really be a breakout star. Maybe not a Pro Bowler in his rookie year, but definitely within his first 2 or 3 years has a good shot of possibly doing that. So I think Adam Gase is a good coach, and we'll see what happens with Tannehill, but I've got him going 7-9, which last year they were 6-10 without Tannehill, but Tannehill's basically been a 7-9, 8-8 quarterback. And I look at the roster, like I said, they still have to they still have some issues, offensive line. Receiving core is pretty decent, could be slightly better. And then, of course, the quarterback situation, again, you wonder about. But the other thing is, defensively, they weren't that great defensively either last year, and one of the guys that was one of their high, I think it was a second-round pick, was Raekwon McMillan from Ohio State, middle linebacker. He missed all of last year with an injury, so that was a setback. Remember, they brought in veteran Lawrence Timmons, and he looked totally done last year. He wasn't effective. And a big thing has been the pass rush. Cameron Wake had, I think, 10.5 sacks last year at 34 years old. He's 35 now. But the team as a whole had 30, which was one of the worst numbers in the league. So you have to have much more of a pass rush than that. And they got Robert Quinn in a trade from the Rams. They actually also brought in William Hayes, another Ram. So they're trying to bolster their pass rush, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Robert Quinn's trying to bounce back and kind of get back to where he was a few years ago. If he has a big year, and Cameron Wake at 35 can still give you 8 or 10 sacks, and maybe William Hayes does a little bit for you off the bench, and maybe you blitz a little bit more with your linebackers, who knows? So they could have a much improved pass rush this year, and that would go a long, long way. But they brought in another Ohio State linebacker in Jerome Baker, drafted him in the 3rd round this year. They still got Kiko Alonso, who's been pretty decent. So their front 7 is starting to get a lot stronger, and that'll really help their secondary. Rashad Jones gave him a big contract, I think it was before last season. And then one of my favorite players in this year's draft, Minkah Fitzpatrick out of Alabama. He's projected right now to be their nickel corner. And then as far as going forward, he could either be a starting cornerback or possibly their free safety. It's going to be very, very interesting. I mean, he's a guy who's really, really talented, big-time playmaker. We're starting to kind of see more and more Alabama defensive players that are really panning out in the NFL, because we kind of saw some of those early guys under Saban that were hit or miss, and now a lot of these guys are starting to really step it up. But he's a guy I'm really high on, so their secondary could definitely look pretty good. But I still think they're still going to need another quarterback going forward, and they're still going to need to bolster some other areas of their team. So I think they're going to be 7-9, but they're another team like the Jets, like a lot of other teams in this league, that could easily go 9-7, make the playoffs. But I am going 7-9. I just don't think Tannehill's the answer, and I think that will hurt him. And who knows if he'll stay healthy? He's had injuries the last couple of years now. And then finally, rounding it out, the Buffalo Bills. I have them going 4-12, and they could actually do worse than that. They could actually have the worst record in the league this year. It would be a big drop from last year. Last year was the first time since '99 they made the playoffs. They went 9-7, just got in, with the Ravens losing. But rough offseason so far. Shady McCoy, there's all that stuff with the ex-girlfriend or estranged girlfriend or what have you, and who knows how long that's going to take to get resolved. And he may never play for the Bills or anybody else again if he's guilty of all the things he's accused of. Remember, he's 30 already, so he's still playing at a high level, but he's 30. That's a magic, dreaded number for running backs. So you may not have him. You rushed for 2,017 yards in 2017. The Bills as a whole, McCoy, I can't remember how many he had. It was at least 12 or 1,300. But as a team collectively, 2,017 rushing yards in 2017. It's an easy one to remember. But I think that's going to take a step back, because a little bit of that was Tyrod Taylor. Now you're not going to have that running quarterback for the most part. Receiving core has been pretty subpar for quite some time now. Kelvin Benjamin said he's determined to show that he's still the best receiver of his draft class from a few years ago, and he thinks he could have a big year. But again, with the quarterback questions, you signed A.J. McCarron, who I was very high on coming out of Alabama, but the Bengals could have easily moved on from Andy Dalton, and they stuck with Andy Dalton instead of giving A.J. McCarron a chance. And A.J. McCarron didn't get the interest in free agency people thought he would. Ended up settling on a 2-year, $10 million deal, which is backup money. So, a lot of people aren't sure what to think of him. He'll be interesting, and will he get a chance to start right away? Nathan Peterman, former 4th or 5th round pick last year, had that really bad debut against the Chargers, 4 interceptions in the first half. He doesn't seem like he's really the answer as a long-term franchise quarterback. Obviously, they traded up and they took Josh Allen out of Wyoming 7th overall. I said it on my blog, or on my website, I should say, when I did that rookie quarterback article about a month or so ago, that I think he's going to be a big-time bust. I think he's going to be out of the league in 5 years. A lot of turnover issues with college quarterbacks seem to be pretty correctable, but accuracy, if you're terribly accurate, 56% passer in college like he was, it's tough to overcome that. And not only the accuracy was bad, but he was bad when he did play big games against big non-conference teams, really terrible numbers. Just, wasn't clutch at all, didn't put the team on his back ever. He also did have some turnover issues a couple years ago, not so much last year. But yeah, I just think he's a guy that the NFL, the scouts, they fall in love with the size and the arm strength. He has a lot of size, a lot of arm strength. He can throw the ball 80 yards. He's 6'5", 237. Pretty good athleticism. So a lot of people say he's Ben Roethlisberger, but Ben Roethlisberger was a hell of a lot better coming out of Miami, Ohio than Josh Allen looked coming out of Wyoming. So I think this is going to probably ultimately get GM Brandon Beane fired, and it could also cost head coach Sean McDermott his job, depending on how things go with the rest of the team. But I don't think he's the answer either. But he's a guy that his best hope is to sit for a couple of years. And if he sits for a couple of years, then he could turn out, a lot better than I think or a lot of people think. But the problem is that's probably not going to happen. They're probably going to try to throw him into the fire, if not week 1, maybe by week 5 or 6, and that would just be a reckless thing to do if you're the Bills. So I think the Bills are probably going to mishandle that with the uncertainty of Shady McCoy, if he's going to play or what have you. And then the biggest thing is the offensive line. As much as we can talk about the receivers and everything else, remember they had 2 guys retire, Richie Incognito and Eric Wood, and then you traded away Cordy Glenn, your left tackle. So, and you didn't really do a whole lot to address those this offseason. You brought in some veteran guys. They're kind of underwhelming. So their offensive line could easily be one of the worst in football. And when you're all about running the football, that's really going to kill you. And then with Sean McDermott, being a defensive-minded coach, and you have all these young quarterbacks, especially with Josh Allen coming in, are you going to try to be conservative, or are you going to try to actually develop him if you do play him and let him try to throw and make some mistakes? Defensive-minded head coaches, they don't want their quarterbacks to take risks. But if you're going to draft Josh Allen, you're going to have a guy who's going to take a whole lot of risk, and you have to be prepared for that. So I don't know if Sean McDermott is prepared for that, and that could lead to some conflict. So, I think the Bills are going to have one of the biggest slides of any team this season. They're going to go from 9-7 to I have them at 4-12, and it could be worse. Quarterback issues, like I said, I like McCarron, but I don't know if he's going to pan out or not, and I don't know if he's even going to play, start or play at all this year. It could easily be Josh Allen right away, or even Peterman, which is not really a good thing. But with the offense line issues, and then the running game, because of those issues and because Shady McCoy might not be there, receivers still aren't that great. There's a lot of problems there for Buffalo. And you think about the defensive side of the ball, when Rex Ryan was a coach there for the past few years prior to last year, he made a top-flight defense worse. And that defense fell apart under him, even though he was supposed to be the defensive genius. And so McDermott comes in and takes over, and he switches from the 3-4 that the Bills have been playing in to a 4-3. That's what he did when he was defensive coordinator in the past, when he was with the Carolina Panthers and all that. So what happens, because they had all these changes, they end up still being a pretty substandard unit. They were still bottom third in the league in a lot of categories. I just think that you still have question marks about some of your pass rushers. Jerry Hughes is starting to decline. You do have Tre'Davious White in that secondary, and you have Micah Hyde and Jordan Porter. So you have a loaded secondary, but the front seven is going to decide the fate of that defense, because you have the great secondary. Definitely a big fan of Micah Hyde especially, but secondary is terrific. It's just the front seven, you just wonder, do they have enough of a pass rush? Can they do a better job stopping the run? They brought in Star Lotulelei. Kyle Williams is still there, and he's pretty old. He's like 35, 36. But you did draft Harrison Phillips out of Stanford, who's basically a Kyle Williams clone. So the talent is there, and they could have a big turnaround in defense, which could save them offensively. Because remember, you go from Tyrod Taylor, who I really didn't think was that great. I really didn't think he was the reason why they got to the playoffs. It was really more about their defense that I think played better than the rankings last year, especially some of the things they did in the secondary with all the takeaways and everything, and the great running game as well. But the one good thing that Tyrod Taylor did do is he could run a little bit, and also because he was dink and dunk quarterback, even though he couldn't lead you to any comeback victories, even small margins like we saw in that wild card playoff game against the Jaguars, at the same time, because he was dinking and dunking, he rarely ever turned it over. Now you're going into a situation where if Josh Allen plays, he's going to turn over a lot. A.J. McCarron, we don't know if he'll turn over a lot. Nathan Peterman turned it over a lot last year. He probably turned it over as much in one game as Tyrod Taylor did all of last season. So, the front seven is going to be a big decider for the defense. If the defense can carry this team, they can make a run at the playoffs. They can make a run, 7, 8, 9 wins. especially if Josh Allen's not playing and McCarron plays and looks pretty good. But I just think there's so many ifs, and I just think there's a lot of uncertainty there. I think a lot of the guys they lost just really kill them. So I think the Bills are going to go 4-12, and they're going to have one of the worst records in the league. Just not feeling too good about the Bills. And to be fair, a lot of the people in the national media aren't feeling great about the Bills. I'm not sure if Bills fans are feeling that great. So it's a disappointing feeling. Finally get back to the playoffs after almost 20 years, and now you're going back to being bad again. But they have a lot of pieces long term. So Josh Allen, even though I'm not a believer, they still have a lot of other stuff to look forward to 2019, 2020, and beyond. And if Allen does prove me and a lot of people wrong, then with him, this is a team that can be a really good or even great team down the road. But right now, I just think, especially the offensive issues personnel-wise with the line, quarterback situation, receivers, and not having Shady McCoy possibly, depending on what happens, I just think that's too much for the Bills to overcome. So I've got the Bills 4-12, and that'll be all she wrote for them. So at any rate, that's my AFC East preview. I remember, go to the sugarhuddle.com, keep checking out all the articles. I'm trying to do stuff beyond the previews as well. With some of these other articles, I did an article about the Pro Football Hall of Fame the other day. I also did a video on it. And I'm trying to post content every day and trying to expand that website gradually. But yeah, please go check it out. I'm Eric Murray, sugarhuddle.com. And this week coming up, starting tomorrow, I'm going to start doing the NFC North. So I'll be doing the NFC North on the sugarhuddle.com all week, and then I'll have the video by the end of the weekend. So, okay, thanks.